100.
I'm starting to record because
That's a
you're.
good time. Yeah. So when I look at shared backfields
Yeah.
in fantasy football, and I looked at specifically my MVP index, which grades upside consistency. That's the best way to describe what it does.
Mhm.
And, a lot of people would look at an index like that and they would look every 10 points and say, oh, that's significant. Not really. 100, like 90, to 100 and 100 to 110 and 110 to 120 are not equal drops in number of players. For instance, median for 100 plus over the last 5 years, 13 players,
Mhm.
and the range 11 to 16. 11 on the low side, 16 to the high side. So it's a fairly well laid out.
Yeah.
There's not a huge
So
skew.
I think the what I've seen distribution wise is in this pattern. I don't know.
Yes,
Can you
yes,
see this?
yes, yes.
Yeah. So that's the pattern. So I wanted to uh, bring in the whiteboard here. I think
Yeah,
people mistake it for a linear,
yes,
and
yes.
that's not what happens. It tends to be like this pattern. So you get a lot of skew early, and you'll see that a lot in distribution of uh, fantasy football points and points per game. There's this skew, and
Yes.
in tight ends, I've seen it really skew
Oh yeah. Yeah.
towards the top here. And I've got some. If we do get a chance to go into my data, I'm not sure we have time, but we can. But tight ends will show that. But anyway, that's when we people I think want to say this, and I hope people realize it's more this kind of which is non-linear. In other
Yeah.
words, it becomes linear later, like this side of the drafting. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way to put it. And last year
yeah.
at running back was a really deep pool of high MVPs. And by
So
that I
what
mean,
was the highest?
well, it wasn't so much the highest number,
Uh-huh.
okay, but the highest number was pretty high. It was 158.8
One
for Bijan Robinson.
158.
But when I
But
say
what's the median?
the median for this for as far as reaching 150,
No, just the median of the population last
the
year.
median of the population is pretty low because you have so many more players that are in the lower
Yeah.
half.
So
Okay.
so RB1, where
So
would you say the cut? Do you consider the cutoff 100?
yes. So last year, typically the
Uh-huh.
cutoff is 100. The
Right.
median over the last 5 years is 13. Population of 13 over 100. So
So
that's basically
13. So that's basically RB1s.
correct. But last year we had 16 that were over
So
100.
so last year was 16. So that's
Yes.
did you predict that beforehand? Yeah, in other words, is that unusual? No, if we looked at the last 5 years, is it more closer to 13 than 16? Was last year an anomaly having
Last
that
year
many?
was last year was the highest we've had in the last 5 years.
So it was
And
an anomaly.
no, it was definitely an anomaly. Um, 2 of the last 5 years have been right at the median of 13.
Right.
One of the years at 12, the low at 11 and the high at 16. So this
Yeah.
high
Mm-hmm.
was higher than the low versus the
So
median.
if I put 11 here, and there's the median, and there's 16. So that's kind of the distribution. It's
Correct.
11 to 16 of the RB1s by the MVP.
Yeah, and last year we had 11 that were over 110, which that was the all-time
Wow.
high. The
So it's
the
an unusual year.
it was an unusual year, and what I think is going to happen is I think that's the peak. So I think we're going to start seeing teams reacting to not having healthy running backs for the playoffs. And I think you're going to start seeing some of these teams realizing that they need it's almost going to be like the NBA version of load control. Only in the NFL, you don't lose a game, you just get fewer touches in a game. And I think we're going to see that. But the other unusual thing that we've got right now is we've got a heavy skew of
This is
young guys.
2025.
Yeah. Yeah. This was 2025. I think we're going to see a drop in that number. I think we're going to revert back closer to the median. So I think now I have 15 forecasted over 100.
So,
But here's
yeah.
but here's the thing there. Of the 15 that are over 100,
right.
I only have 3 of them whose floor is at 100 or greater.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 of the
So
15,
a lot of variation.
a lot of variation. And if I look at the upside forecast, I've got a ton of players forecast to that upside. But so here's how I did my forecast this year. I've always thought in the terms of low and high. What's the range of a player? But I've never really cataloged it. Okay. So this year, I actually went and did my May forecasts already. Post draft, I always do my forecast for May. You know, my May version of my forecast, way too early.
Right.
But
way
I
too
put
early.
It, yeah, and I believe that I'll get better as the season goes on, but we'll find out because I'm keeping track. I'll do a May forecast that's already done and big cataloged for not only where I expect a player to finish on MVP, but where his low and high is. And that varies greatly. So I will have a player who I forecast at, let's say, a 140 on MVP. Bijan Robinson and Jamar Gibbs have a forecast of 140, but they don't have the same floor and ceiling. They have the same ending number, but I've actually got a slightly lower floor for Jamar Gibbs, which makes sense because he was sharing touches more than Bijan was last year, and a slightly higher ceiling for Bijan, which makes sense because he had the higher ceiling last year. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of players that will have a very lopsided towards the bottom or towards the top of the range. Their forecast won't be right in the middle. And the reason is because I know with a little bit of certainty, let's say Jamar Gibbs, for instance, I got him forecast at 140. I got an absolute ceiling of 150 for him.
140, but your ceiling is 150.
150, but I've got a 105 floor for him. Now, 105 floor is very healthy. Okay.
But you're thinking 140 is.
That's the most likely outcome.
Yeah.
So
the gap here is very small. The gap here is very large,
which tells you as a user of this data, and this is again.
So he's a lot. So if we were to envision this, if I was teaching this, I would call him a lollipop player.
Correct.
Correct. You see, I'm just wondering How many
if I'm
lollipops are in your top group?
Yeah, that's a
You
good
see,
question.
so how
Yep.
does that distribution, in other words, by visualizing a player like this in a visual way, Dennis, that's part of and I don't know if we'll get to it this year, but I would love to have a visual way to express our forecasting with the Bush factor and
Oh
the
yeah.
figure.
Yeah.
And so, in other words, a different player would be more like one of those slowpokes candies, and it would be kind of like
It-
that. In other words, the gap, would be more here and here, and here would be more equal. So
yeah,
a
and that's
slowpoke versus a Tootsie Pop. That's what
and
I'm
that
thinking.
yeah, and that's Ashton-Genty.
So this
So
is Aston Genty, the
yeah,
slowpoke.
so I've got him forecasted
Uh
for
huh.
a 105, which
Uh
is a
huh.
really healthy
Uh huh.
result for a rookie.
Uh huh.
Okay, it's very
So
comparable.
what's his floor?
I've got his floor at 90
Okay.
and his ceiling at 120. I've got him
There you
smack
go.
dab in
He
the middle.
is a slowpoke.
Yeah, it's a complete slowpoke.
So if we look at the RBs, how many are lollipops? How many are slowpokes?
My rookies will tend to be all slowpokes. And the reason
So,
is because I don't have enough data to know
but
which is likely to
traditionally,
miss.
traditionally over the last years, how has that really looked? In other words, if we looked back at 2024 at the rookies, would this designation be real, or is it a miss? In
Well,
other words, why
yeah,
are you landing here? What is driving this forecast for you
it,
in rookies?
uncertainty. So I don't have any data to
So
go
you
by.
don't. So,
I
okay,
don't have a
but that's
track
fine.
record.
And you know
Yes.
what, folks? You can propose, the scientific method allows us to propose a hypothesis. So we're talking the slowpoke hypothesis here, even though that's where they're not really slow. But the visualization of their distribution of the forecast. So, Dennis, if we start doing it like this in a few years, you could look back and say, my rookies, they really should be maybe day one rookies are more lollipops, maybe day two
Yes.
and three are slowpokes.
That's actually pretty accurate to
I'm just
assume that.
wondering.
Yes. Yeah.
You see, I'm trying to so getting back to things, and I don't know if we're going to get to that this year, but that's what I would love for you and I to take that next step, to leave the numbers. In other words, let the numbers give us a visual view so that people could look in and see the numbers in a visual way, because most people now, the younger folks, are visual learners.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Dennis, that's why, having been a university professor, that's I would draw and try to make things like this. I would try to illustrate concepts with a visual way, and the kids really like that more. So I'm just throwing down the gauntlet for you and I don't know when we'll get to this. Maybe, it's folks, it's a work in progress, but this is, I think, the way, especially in a fast draft. Can you imagine if you've got 30 seconds and you could visualize, okay,
Yes.
I've got a bunch of slow pokes and a few lollipops. So what does that mean? In other words, if we looked at the end of the season, do the lollipops really give us one, what does the diary say? And that could allow us to visualize in a quick snap judgment in a fast draft. Slow draft, we have time to look at the numbers, Dennis. And
Yes.
that's why I enjoy it, because I would rather chew on the data a little bit more and get beyond just the simple visualization. But I'm thinking this would be a good starting point if we could look at players with a visual way and represent their floor ceiling. And I'm wondering, with our multi variables, our scale to 100,
Yes.
what would we draw players at? Because we just started putting them together and had an average number. We didn't even consider a ceiling floor concept with that. Last year, we just let's just throw them together, average them up, scale them, average them up, and let's compare to ADP and let's go. And that's
It-
what we did.
yeah.
This
And
is
more.
asking to move further to the forecasting
Yes.
side. This is what you've done. So I'm putting, this is your homework in the next few years, Dennis. I wanted to draw this out. This is where I want our multi metrics to go. And I want us to test to see, does this help us or not? Can we even get more better visualizing what are we left? What's the chessboard look like after round three? And we just
Yes.
got, and so
Yes.
I guess the opposites would be this, right? Would be an anti slowpoke. Maybe, what I'm saying. I'm trying to visualize what an opposite would be. In other words, the opposite kind of players
Yeah. And
here.
and part of the reason that rookies end up being a more middle of the road forecast is
Yeah.
because I don't have the data extremes of what they have produced. And when I'm looking at a player, for instance, I'm looking at, let's just pick somebody. I'm looking at Saquon Barkley.
Yeah.
Okay. I look back at his last 3 seasons.
Yeah.
He's had a 125 MVP last year,
That's pretty good.
92, 92.9 the year before, 112.5. Okay.
92.5
So if I look at
and a
that and I say,
112.
yeah. So I look at that and I say, okay, he was on the high side, 125. What if he has a higher number of touchdowns this year? He could go up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I said, high based on his expectations, 130. Okay. Now I could have given him higher, but
Right.
I think 130 was reasonable compared to what he's done in the past, especially since he established that 125 with his current team. I look at the low side and it's like, damn, he was in the low 90s. Now we can say that was with the Giants. They had a lousy offense, they had some issues. He also had some injuries that brought, wasn't a bad enough injury to knock him out of the game,
Mm-hmm.
but it was bad enough to limit what he could do. And if you look way back, okay, you look over the course of his entire last 5 seasons,
Mm-hmm.
he had a 50 back in 2021. Now, again, that was with the Giants, and he's not with the Giants. But what if Philadelphia's defense got worse
Mm-hmm.
in the offseason? What if they have to pass the ball a little bit more often? So I gave him a floor of 65 based on the fact that he's had a full season at a 50. And I felt I had to come up a little bit from that in 65. Now, when you're doing a forecast like this,
So what's
it's
his median forecast?
so his medians, I got him at a 110. Like I feel really confident that he's a 110 player on an average season. Like
So
I
to
feel good.
me,
So he's had 2 of the last 3 seasons in the 110s.
he's
Okay, he's
more of a
been
slow. You've got him as a Tootsie Pop.
yes, yes. So he's got a little heavier. He's got a heavier downside. than upside.
Yeah.
But he established that downside. So it's in his data that he could have a low season. What is the likelihood of hitting 65 and not being higher than 70? Probably not too high.
Well, Dennis, if 50% chance he's at 110, is that what you're saying? Because when I visualize this number, that's what I think. But are you saying, what is this 50 percentile?
So I don't like to
You don't
think
do it that way.
I don't like to think in 50%. So this is, if I were to say, what is my confidence on any of these absolute forecasts?
Mm-hmm.
I'd say it's in the 70% range. I think what is 70% or more likely, and it's for him to hit 110 or higher.
So
So
this is 70%.
70%,
Wow.
correct. So that's a 70%
Chance.
confidence factor.
And this
And so,
is a 30% chance.
so yes. So I got 30% could be higher or lower. It's split between the higher and lower. And in this case, I've got a lower chance that that I'll miss the forecast. If I'm going to miss the forecast, I'm not likely to miss it to the high side. I think he's going to be in the 110s to 120s, which is where he was last year. So that's kind of how I think through these forecasts. And I took into consideration he had a lot of carries last year. And it's very rare for guys to be able to withstand 350 carry seasons in a row. Those are unusual players. So I think the volume's got to come down for Barkley. And that's why I handicapped it the way I did. And speaking of which, if you are drafting Saquon Barkley, and I highly recommend that, I wouldn't mind adding him to the team, I got a long shot for you to pick up on your exiting last round of the draft. Grab AJ Dillon. They signed him to back up Barkley, and his only competition is Will Shipley. So that's the way I would use this data. Is I'd say, first of all, if I'm drafting a guy in the top 10 at running back,
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking late rounds at grabbing his backup, because I want to make sure that that position is well represented on my team. If I'm thinking that the starting running back is in the top 6 is what this represents this year, I want that production on my team no matter who it is. It's actually top 8 to be generous. But that's the guy I want on my team. It's actually tied for 7th. Got to look at the data before you talk. But he's in my conversation as RB7 now. He's in the conversation on ADP as first player off the board. So he's probably not going to end up on my teams this year, and I'm okay with that. But in Dynasty, I'm protecting him with AJ Dillon everywhere I've got Barkley.
I propose that we consider the visualization concept, and
Yes, I love that.
yeah, and
Yeah,
I don't know when we'll get to that, folks, but I think by having, and then Dennis said 70-30, and that's, I'm just trying to probabilityize. I know that's not a word, but to visualize via probability on what you're telling us here. And I'm
yeah,
curious, I would love to see our multi-metrics, forecasting, because eventually that's where we want to be. If you want to think those different metrics combined are telling us more than any one. At least that's the concept we're going on. That's what we're going to be testing next few years is that, and it may be figuring out of the 4 or 5, which 1 or 2 or 3 are what we need to capture. In other words, at some point, you add and it's not worth it. In other words, and I
Yes.
don't know where that point is, Dennis, and I don't know what metric that is, but that's where we're going.
And I can even see a situation, Professor, where we're using the static what happened in 24
Yeah,
as one of the tools
it
that
could
goes
be.
goes into
Yeah.
the consensus and then the forecast. And the reason I say that is because if I've got a guy
Uh-huh.
who I'm forecasting at a 125 MVP
Yeah.
and he had a 125 or higher the year before, that's like 2 green flags to pick
Right.
him.
Right.
And that's, more than using a sum of all 6 indices last year, I was treating them more as green flag, red flag.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had an early draft pick, I wanted him to have 6 green flags. I wanted him to be as bulletproof as I could have him. Later on in the draft, I was happy just to see 1 green flag. If we had a guy that was in that top third at any one of these indices, and he was going in the 8th round. My gosh, we're getting a guy that we really like because you're talking, 90, 80 some picks into the draft, almost 90. You're in the 90s in round 8, and the chance of landing a top 6 guy or a top 12 guy at a position goes down considerably, except for quarterback. But at running back and wide receiver, like those have been picked over. Now, if you nail one of those top 12 guys in that pick, you now have a guy who's going to help your team immensely because you got value at a cheap price. One of my redraft teams that won a championship last year, Professor,
Right.
I had drafted Rashee Rice and Godwin to that team. Obviously, not good the way injuries ended up playing.
Mm-hmm.
But later in the draft, I got Brian Thomas Jr. and I got Jacoby Myers. They ended up bailing me out. Those are the kinds of picks where you get them really late or later relative to where they finished the season. If I got a guy that's plus 15
Mm-hmm.
at position versus ADP where I took him 25th and he finishes 10th.
Yeah.
That's almost more valuable than taking the 5th guy and having him end up being 5th because you got such a bargain on that player. He is going to help your team immensely. And I think that's the way we need to look at this data is, once I get past a certain point in the draft, and it's never, it's not a switch flipping, it's a dimmer,
Right.
it's there, but there comes a time when you transition more to what's this guy's upside. If everything goes right, what's his upside? I mean, case in point this year, Najee Harris, okay,
Yeah.
with the Los Angeles Chargers, a team that's going to run a lot. He's got a career best of 105.9 for MVP. But they brought in a rookie. They might bring back Dobbins. Now, all of a sudden, he weighs to the low side. But what if he wins out and he has a really solid season? That 105 is still legitimate for his upside, right?
Yes.
If everything goes together. But on the contrast to that, if he's the backup, or even worst case, he's the third stringer and gets only sporadic use, he's a 40 on MVP. He's not even in the discussion for being a starter. So his variance between the low and the high is incredibly high this year. But if I'm late in the draft and he's still on the board, especially if I grabbed one of the other pieces in that backfield, I'm taking a shot. I'm taking the swing because his upside is tremendous if everything goes according to plan. Now, is it going to go according to plan? Well, my 70% forecast for him, he hasn't met a 65. That's RB 26. You don't want him starting for you. You don't want to be stuck with him.
Gotcha.
But I don't mind having him on the bench because if something would happen to Hampton, the rookie, who seems to be the heir apparent, then you're in good shape. And how many rookies bust?
How many do?
Fairly often. Like we see, Blake Corum was taken last year by Los Angeles. And everybody was like, oh, man, he's going to be kicking Kyron Williams to the bench. How did that work out? Didn't work out at all. Like, there are a lot of rookies that come in. Now, granted, Corum was taken much later in the draft. Hampton was taken with the 22nd pick. There's a big difference. But same theory applies. So Corum was taken with the 83rd pick in the draft. That's still fairly early in a draft for a running back. And to give you a comparison there of other guys, how about this year? Ashane was 84th in his draft. So that's comparable. In this year's draft, you've got, RJ Harvey. He was taken a little bit earlier than that, but not a lot. So, Harvey was 60th in the draft. He was the 60th pick off the board. So, you've got guys that can hit late. 22nd, man, they're thinking this guy's going to be a stud. But rookies, it's a big jump to the next level. So you got to look at that and say, okay, if this doesn't happen, if he doesn't work out, who's next up? And that's kind of the mentality that you've got to attack a draft with.
I agree. I like it. I've done some, survivorship analysis over the years. Dennis, I'll do these studies and I forget where I put them. I know I made a video of them. And just want to let you know, our friend Greg Kellogg, Hall of Fame guy in fantasy football, he just tweeted out a thing, and he was curious. Said, I really need to do more research on rookie tight ends. I know there are outliers, but most fantasy analysts believe it takes 2 or 3 years to develop. I'm wondering what the typical development time is, and if draft capital matters. Maybe I can convince the FF scientists to take up the study. What say you, DMC and Professor Fantasy, you game? And this is to Coventry and
very good.
And somebody else there. So there's some let's see, Derek Brown. He's Fantasy Pros, betting pro.
Derek knows his stuff. He's a very smart
So those guys Greg replied to, but then he mentioned us to do some studies. So interesting. So I thought I'd let you know we're being petitioned there. That's good. That's good.
So,
I think I've done some tight
yeah.
end work years ago. It's been a while. I need to go find my video lesson, but I'm sure I could update the data there. But I was just thinking about that issue. So,
Yeah, and it's crazy if you look at the data, and I've only sorted through a little bit of it. For instance, Hawkinson was taken with the 8th pick.
yeah.
Hawkinson is a very interesting player to look at because he did have a fairly quick hit, but you know, you also had Pitts, who was taken with the 4th pick, famously had 1,000-yard season as a rookie and hasn't done anything since.
Yeah.
I saw a chart of top 10 tight ends drafted, and it seemed to show they did a heck of a lot better than guys taken later in the first round, even. But you're right. I don't think there is a set pattern that, Bowers was taken 13th last year. He worked out pretty darn good. But in contrast, Kittle was taken with pick 146. McBride, 55. Kelsey was pick 63. Mark Andrews was an 86. Those are your top tight ends this year.
Yeah.
They were all taken much, much later. So, with the exception of Hawkinson and Bowers, all the rest of your top tight ends were taken outside of the top 50 picks. So, I'm not so sure that we get the data that indicates, is Loveland taken at 10, is Warren taken at 14. That seems to be important, but remember, you got two of the things going on. They're drafting him for real NFL football, not necessarily to be a tight end who's going to win you a fantasy league. But I think the Bears feel pretty good about Loveland at the pick 10, adding to that offense. So how do we respond in fantasy football? Maybe he takes a year or two to develop, but I'm not sure.
I've got to go dig that up. I don't know.
Yeah.
I never know where I put that stuff.
And that's the thing, is there's a lot of studies that you do that you learn from, but you need to go back and find the absolute details. And what happened in 1990,
it's different
to 2000,
2000,
2010, 2010 to 2020, and now in 25. The NFL game is always changing.
Yeah, rules are changing and whatnot.
Rules are changing. The type of player that are
the
coming
season's
out,
expanding. Yeah,
season's expanding.
Yeah.
Everything's always changing. So we need to look at most recent results. And at the tight end position, there aren't a lot of guys taken in the top 20 on any given year. So, or any given 5-year period, you got maybe 5 of them. It's
I've got to look at the database and see what I've got. I think I've got it somewhere.
But always good to take.
I'm so deep in the rabbit hole. What I'm trying to do now, it is hard. Like I said, I need interns to figure all this out. But anyway,
so here's the most recent 2 really good tight ends that 1 and 2 on my board this year. So Brock Bowers came out of the box with a 94.1.
Right.
No rookie has done that, So do we turn around and say, oh, that's the new standard for rookies? No. And in contrast, Trey McBride's rookie year?
Mhm.
How about a minus 22.2?
Yeah.
He was sharing time at tight end with
With
Zach
Ertz.
Ertz.
Yeah. Yeah.
His first year as the lead tight end, 92.3, very comparable to what Bowers did his rookie year.
Mhm.
And then McBride last year went up to 106.
Right.
So we know what Trey McBride is. Now, again, you got Marvin Harrison Jr. second season. If he goes up, does McBride come down a little bit? And those are the kinds of things that you just never know. You've got a reasonable expectation of a forecast, but it's hard to put a solid number on a guy. I've got him declining this year, Trey McBride. But my forecasts tend to be very conservative. So my 70% confidence factor is that it'll be 95 or higher, is how I look at my forecast.
Mm-hmm.
I feel pretty good about that. If you were to say, narrow it, go out to 50%, I'd probably increase him. But at a 70% confidence, I feel good that he'll hit 95 this year. And that's kind of how I look at those forecasts, 95 and above, 70% likelihood. That's where I'm going to put that number. Now, do I have hard data? No, it's the art of the forecast. Similar, meteorology is science. I can tell you, exactly what the standard atmosphere is, what this is, what that is. There's definitions for those. My weather forecast, why did you do that? Well, it's part science, part feeling. No different than handicapping a horse race. Who's going to win? Well, here's your contenders. Here's why they're contenders. Here's how I think the race is going to go. You cannot put data, like I don't have hard data on every forecast that I make. It's a logic. It's a decision tree that gets you to that point. And how accurate will I be? Guess what? We will find out this year, won't we? Because when you commit to putting a high-low forecast on every player in the National Football League that's on a roster right now, mm-hmm. and you grade yourself at the end of the year, I'll know how accurate I was. And by looking at that over the course of the next 3, 4, 5 seasons, mm-hmm. maybe I'll be able to refine my forecast skills to have narrower ranges of players. Right now, my ranges are based on how much could their offense change from the year before to what have they done over the last 3
I'm sitting here looking
seasons.
at my Bush number for Bowers. 1 to 48 slice, the top 48 weekly metric. And I'm looking, he got a 0.35, and I'm looking, Kittle's, when he hit that, was his second season. McBride hit that last year. Jonnu Smith, Njoku. Kelsey didn't hit that to his third season.
Yep.
Andrews hit it his second season. Ertz, it took him close to his fourth season.
Yep.
Yeah, Komet has never done that. Likely nope. He's never done that. Believe it or not, Evan Ingram, his first season was a Bowers-like season in 2017.
Yep.
But he declined still pretty good the next 2 years, and then had some injuries and has been, in 2023 hit it, but he's been hit or miss. But his first 3 seasons, Evan Eagle were spectacular, 2017, 18, and 19. So almost running back like, which is very different than what we expect. I'm looking at other ones here. Austin Hooper, it took him 4 seasons to hit that. Wow. Dawson Knox hit it his third season. Then this is from 2013. Uh, and again, there's a lot of tight ends that never hit that level, Dennis.
Yeah. Yep.
So see, there's another issue. There are a lot of tight ends that never even close. Tyler Higbee took him 4 seasons, and then he busted back down. He peaked 2019.
Mhm.
Disley beat them all his first season, 2018. Will Disley, and he had 2 good seasons, and he crashed. So I've got some historical with the weekly Bush number, but Bowers definitely But of the ones, somebody like Kelsey who's got into it, he it took him a while to, like, 2 seasons. The third season he popped, and he hadn't. He declined his last 2 years, and for him, it's still better than most tight ends have ever done.
Yes.
0.26, 0.31 last year, and it's very hard. You know, Kittle had an amazing 2024, Dennis, in my number, 0.05. I don't
Yeah.
think any tight end, maybe Disley that 1 year.
And maybe Kelsey Kelsey
Oh,
had a year where he hit a 160
yes,
in my
yes,
that was 2020.
2020.
Yep.
Yeah, 2020, 2022 was 0.06.
Yep.
Nobody has ever hit that. I'm looking at the distribution, and I mean, there's nobody hit 0.06.
Yeah.
So,
2020 was the year that I was invited during, COVID.
yeah. And 2022, Dennis, my
Yep.
numbers having coming back, but he
Yeah.
uh he really peaked then.
2020 was the year that I was invited by some of the fantasy football folks over on Twitter to play a redraft league, 12-team redraft over on
Is this the
ESPN.
one they got mad at you and threw you
They,
out?
yeah, well, this is the one that they never invited me back a second year because
You whipped
in
their
the
ass the
in
first
the
year.
in the draft chat prior to the draft being held, and we did a very quick draft, which is not what I like doing, but it was like, oh, what the heck? There's no money on the line. 2-minute draft clock. I'll try this once.
Yeah.
And in the draft chat, which everybody started getting there like 20 minutes before the draft started, half hour before is when the positions were chosen, by
Wow.
random. So everybody started getting in there about 20 minutes till, and everybody's, oh, I wonder who the first idiot's going to be. This is exactly how it was put. The first idiot who's going to pick Kelsey in the first round. And then I wonder who's going to be the first idiot who picks a quarterback. These were all guys who believed in late quarterback drafts. So I was assigned the 12th draft pick.
Yeah. So you hit the turn.
So I just decided that I was going to be a double idiot. And I took Kelsey,
Yeah.
followed him up with Mahomes. I only
And
had one loss all season.
yeah.
And then I got annihilated by Kamara in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But I had one loss all season, doing the idiot strategy of being the first one to take a quarterback and a tight end,
Yeah.
and took them in the first and second rounds.
Hey,
But, it just, my point at that point was to show that any strategy could be a winning strategy.
well,
And if you play it, and you're right on the players that you take after that, any strategy can be a winning strategy. The best strategies will increase your win chances.
yep.
And but literally you can make any strategy a winning one if if you end up being right about who you think the value players are. And, that's going to be one of my favorite drafts of all time because I outsmarted the clan, and it was just, I was doing it just to be a jerk, just to have fun. But it's the kind of thing where you can hit on guys at different points in the draft. You can make any strategy a winning one, but I wouldn't suggest that each and every year.
Nope. 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 We probably should start the show, huh?
Absolutely. Let's crank this baby up. How you doing, everybody? This is Dennis Michelson. Welcome to the science of fantasy football. Why the science of fantasy football? You get a meteorologist and a biologist together. They're going to use a scientific method, and I'm going to guarantee you that if you use the scientific method when it comes to how you analyze stats in fantasy football, you are going to win more because it just simply means you're going to use statistics to give you the answers rather than coming up with an idea of who you like the most, cherry picking stats to support that opinion. You know what I call that, folks. I call it using statistics the way a drunk uses a light pole. And joining me as does each and every week, he is the fantasy professor. He's a real professor emeritus. It's John Bush. And John, smack dab in the middle of draft season because everybody is just too psychotic. As soon as the NFL draft is over, they've got to get fantasy football drafts going or they just don't feel right.
Well, the stats argument, Dennis, remember when you set up an experiment,
Yes.
you got to continue and you can't change in the middle. In other words, we
Yes.
had a famous experiment back when we were kids and they would show it on TV. How many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? And the wise old owl said 3. He licked it and then he bit it and see that had violated the experiment. See how many licks and you cheat. It was the funny thing. So he was even though he had the appearance of being a scientist, Dennis, he cheated. You don't change the experiment in the middle of it, and he couldn't. That wouldn't have worked with a slowpoke
No.
candy because you can't bite into that caramel candy. So, if you saw the the pre-show draft discussion, you see that Tootsie Pops and Slowpokes were featured in our whiteboard discussion of Dennis's forecasting. And if you get a chance, you should see the video of that. But anyway, Dennis, remember you set your experiment and you don't cheat and bite down on the Tootsie Pop to cheat the experiment. You continue the lick. And I don't think we've ever decided how many licks it really takes. But because, kids, it's when you talk about everybody's in a hurry, all these people that in a hurry, Dennis, they would cheat and bite the candy. You see, me, I'm not going to get serious in drafting until August, so I'm willing to take the slow poke and be slow, and I'm just going to float in the weeds, and everybody's going to be running around crazy. Then I'm going to be the scientific barracuda, reach in there, grab them values, and slip back before people realize what just happened. Kind of like in the draft night out, we reached in there and got Henry, and everybody's looking around. What just happened? Well, the science boys just happened, and we're going to be floating in the weeds in the expo again, Dennis. We've got to spank them once again, and they're not going to invite us back.
Yeah, and by the way, using my MVP index, Derrick Henry was a 141 last year. So that was pretty darn good. How good is 141? Usually only have two guys at 140 or greater on any given year. Last year we had four of them though, Professor.
That's
It was a
crazy. It was a weird year last year, wasn't it?
deep year at running back, but this gets to what I wanted to talk about
Okay.
today during the show, because
Well, let's talk.
You got to have a philosophy going into the draft, and not this time of the year. If you're drafting best ball this time of the year, you're just doing it for fun. Okay.
Now, I will say, we are doing our rookie draft, Dennis. There's been five or six picks. We may have to pick during the show.
It is a possibility right now in
but
our
anyway,
dynasty.
Get back to the philosophy here.
In our dynasty team, it's all gone pretty much chalk to this point. Giante went number one. This is a one quarterback league, by the way.
I'll pull that up. I can share it with people. But the philosophy. So, Dennis, I'm going to cut to I know you were getting wound up, and you can circle. But what is the philosophy that we are going to apply for this dynasty? I think you got an article. I do need to put that out. And I'm entering the draft room. There's the little message here. And let's see, we are up in 5 picks.
5 picks.
Dennis. So let's see. Let me show people where we're at. But we have a philosophy, and I know they're not listening. And of course, we're not going to tell them who we are, but we are the Boilermaker Crawfish. And I said, "Oh, you've already got your queue up, Dennis.
I've got the queue up.
You've got a tight end in your queue. What is going on?" So anyway, tell me the philosophy for the first round, and that will continue your diatribe here. But anyway, the folks are seeing our draft here.
So the philosophy in a dynasty draft is very different than the philosophy in redraft or best ball, because in that first round of a dynasty team rookie draft, I don't care what my strengths and weaknesses are as much as I care about getting the absolute best player. I could have 5 great running backs on my team. I could have traded into the first pick in the draft, and I'm taking Giante. He's the best running back, like the safest running back to take in this class. He's being handed a starting position. There's no competition whatsoever, and nobody else can say that. So that's why he's the number one. The number 2 guy that went was Omarion Hampton. I see some problems with his game. He's got Najee Harris as competition. He's got maybe J.K. Dobbins as competition. He's got Vidal from last year as competition, but he should have been in the top 5 players taken, so that's not a bad pick. Then comes Tatoria McMillan, gets a great landing spot. It reminds me of Malik Neighbors last year, where, gets drafted to a weaker team. I think they've got a little better quarterback situation. He's my RB or WR1 in this rookie class, and he's in a tier of 1 all by himself in that group. The third guy off the board, or fourth guy off the board, was Travis Hunter. I don't know how to read Travis Hunter because of 2 problems. One is, does he play a lot of cornerback this year? And does that take away from what he does as a wide receiver? We only score these players on their offensive numbers in this league. It's not a IDP. You don't count defensive stats in this league. So I don't know where to rank him. And to be honest, if he was on the board at 11, I'm not sure we take him. He's got Brian Thomas Jr. in front of him at the wide receiver position. It's not that I think Hunter is going to be a bum, but I just don't think he's going to be better than Brian Thomas Jr. at wide receiver. So that was the fourth player taken, and not a bad pick. He's going as high as second in some of these rookie drafts I've been in. In 5 was Travion Henderson, is a guy that I was hoping would drop to us at 11. Didn't happen. It was a dream if he would be dropping. He's in the second group, in my opinion. He's got to beat out Ramondre Stevenson in New England for that starting role. But he's one of 5 guys that I have in that second tier right now. Gianti's the first tier. Then I got Henderson, Hampton, Quinton Judkins, who was drafted by Cleveland, Caleb Johnson, who was drafted by Pittsburgh, and RJ Harvey, who was drafted by Denver. That's your next tier. So we're in good shape because we've still got some guys in that second tier that are on the board. Will they make it down to us? I don't know. I'm not crazy enough about any of these guys to trade up, or I would trade this Molan Lob guy wants Jalen Waddle. I did offer him Waddle for a first round draft pick, his first round draft pick right here. He didn't, he turned it down. He wants to give us a second, and I don't think that's enough for Waddle. Because by the time he comes back up with that the 6th pick in the second round, all the guys I would want that I think are better than Waddle will be gone. So we're in sitting 11th. I've got some guys I've got an eye on. Matthew Golden, even though we're strong at wide receiver, Matthew Golden might be the best guy left on the board if it continues to go the way I think it will go. Luther Burden from the Bears is another guy that will probably be available for us. But yeah, would I want to go running back? Yes, because I think there's 6 good running backs in this draft, and if we can get one of those 6, that'll be fine. But we've still got 5 picks to go before we take a player. If I really felt one of these guys was worth it, I'd make a trade right here. I don't think after these guys that are off the board, the first 5 that are off the board, I don't necessarily think there's another player that is definitely better than them. And that's kind of my philosophy. We're sitting at 11, then we come back with pick 15, and then we've got pick 22. I'm pretty sure we're going to get 3 really good players at those 3 picks. So I'm happy adding 3 good guys to our roster. And then after that, we'll figure it out. But my philosophy is different. I go first round, best player available. Second round, I start looking at need. I start factoring in need. So with that 3rd pick in the second draft, we're looking running back first. Is there a running back that we really like? Yes, that's the pick. Once we get to the 11th pick in that second round, our second pick of that, it'll be our 3rd pick in the draft. Then we sort first by best player available. I'm not taking a running back if they're not even close to being this in the same category. But rookies are tough to divide up. Again, if you can't look at every player in this draft, whether it's rookie, whether it's veteran, depending on the type of draft you're doing, if you cannot come up with 2 or 3 good things to say and 2 or 3 bad things to say about a player, then you're not thinking the problem through. For instance, Ashton Gianti, first player off the board, going to be playing for the Raiders. Are they going to be all that great this year? Is their offensive line, did they get better on the offensive line? Because last year they weren't very good. Those are the two negatives that I would throw in about him. And number three, he played at a small college relative to, he didn't play against SEC competition. Now, he had a really good game when he played Oregon. So he did do well against good competition, but he didn't play great competition. So that's another negative on him. But on the positive side, he's an explosive runner. He might be the best rookie coming out at running back since Saquon Barkley. That's pretty high praise. But that's how you got to look at every player. I've got to be able to say something good, something bad, or I'm not looking at the problem. I'm just jumping to a conclusion.
Gotcha. Okay. So who do you in your queue? Is Loveland really who you want?
No, I would prefer Judkins, Caleb Johnson, RJ Harvey at running back.
Okay.
I would prefer
but why have you set your queue up different than what you would prefer?
So on the queue, I didn't worry about order.
Okay.
So I just took.
Okay.
Yeah. So I haven't rearranged the queue by order yet. I just looked and I said, who would I take? If I had any of the first 12 picks in this round, who are the
so
who
that
are the
would
best
be
players?
Closer to your top three.
Correct. So I look at my queue. I load
so
it
your
up.
Fourth RB, or would it be Golden, or would it be the two tight ends? Or
Not
who's
sure.
your fourth guy yet?
Yeah, not sure. It's so close. For instance, if I did my rookie forecast. Okay. If we look at my rookie forecasts,
right,
I've got Judkins a range of 50 to 90 on MVP. Caleb Johnson 75 to 100, Harvey 60 to 100. I've got Matthew Golden 60 to 110. Jack Besh, I've got him 30 to 90. It shows you how quick the talent falls off at wide receiver, because he would be the next best on the board after Matthew Golden. And there's also Egbuke on the board at wide receiver. I've got him at a 40 to 90 because he's got two good guys ahead of him. But maybe they took him at pick 19 because maybe Godwin is hurt more than we think he is. Maybe Godwin they don't think is going to come back to full strength. So now they've got a good young wide receiver to go with their great old wide receiver in Mike Evans. But those are the ranges. You can see they quickly fall off.
Right.
But right now the upside says you go running back. But I do like Matthew Golden at wide receiver. We're wide receiver heavy on our team. But if he is there and I've got to look at the next group of running backs, I'm probably thinking we should go Golden or Egbuka. Egbuka, if he had a better landing position, would have been a heck of a pick. Let's say he goes to a wide open team, just like McMillan did. I can't separate him and McMillan. That's how close they are. And Egbuka is probably going to play the slot for Tampa, and that's what Godwin has played in the past. So I look at that and I'm like, wouldn't mind having that production on my team. So, but that's the strategy. When I do the queue again, very different in this draft because it's 8 hours long.
Gotcha.
I know I'm going to go back and look at it. So I just go click, click, click. Who do I think is a guy worthy of being in that queue? in the first round, and that's how I separate them. So I usually do it by position. So I'll take a bunch of running backs, my first and second tier of running backs, my first and second tier of wide receivers, and my first tier of tight ends. Now I've populated the queue. Now I know what to expect when that pick comes up for us.
I'm in your dynasty rookie drafts. I pulled up your article that I need to get out for you, but I finished all the Grammarly's been through there, and if I get a chance, I'm gonna add a few figures here. But anyway, do you want to talk about this now, or should I wait to?
Just in very general terms, okay? Because this is really getting into the weeds for a dynasty draft, and because a lot of dynasty rookie drafts are going right now, I thought I would share that with folks. But this concept is what is important, because you have to think of a draft. It's silly to say, but you have to think of it as a battle in a war. Okay, each round is a battle in the war, and you need to kind of go into every draft with a philosophy of what you think might happen this year versus what happened last year. And in the pre-show, we were talking about how deep running back was last year. We had 6 guys finish, 5 guys, I should say, that finished above 130. Huge group. That's more than 2.5 times higher than median. And it was the best over the last 5 years. And same at every level going up in the draft until you got to 70 or higher. And then all of a sudden they weren't the top group. They weren't the top class in the last 5 years. They were actually right at median by the time you got up to that level or down to that level. But there was a lot of good success at running back this year. And I think that is going to not be the case this year. I think there's going to be some fall off at the position. You've got guys like Henry, who are going to be, Derrick Henry's going to be in his age 31 season. It's not that I expect him to fall off the cliff. We know how well the survivors do. But to expect him to go back to 141, I think would be way too optimistic. So I've got him down a little bit. We've got a lot of the top running backs that have an excuse. McCaffrey, age 29 season, coming off injury. Where do we expect him? That's going to be a tough row to hoe to get him up to that 125 or higher category. I only have 3 guys hitting 125, or I have 4 guys hitting 120 and higher this year. That's half of what happened last year. But it's right at the median for the last 5 years. So I'm forecasting more of a median season than an extreme running back season like we had last year. Why am I doing that? It's because I think teams are going to react more this year to a 17-game season. But that's what I mean, that you have to have a philosophy of the draft. You have to have a game plan. And I like to put my game plan in a decision tree format. And I will be sharing my redraft strategy, decision tree making. My better than zero is a decision tree concept. It just evolves as you go. The wonderful thing about a dynasty rookie draft is they're usually 3 or 4 or 5 rounds is all. So it's easy to have a strategy that is well defined. And that strategy is very simple for me. Best player available, then more need as you go down the draft. I did give the example of a team where I ended up being heavy running back with my picks. it was because of what was available, and then it was because of what my team need was. And that was a strategy I had going in. It doesn't mean you don't adjust your strategy. If McMillan or Egbuka had dropped to me late in that draft, I would be looking at him and going, okay, before I make my decision. Because you got to look at every option that's available to you.
Okay. So, like I said, I will try to get this out. This draft decision tree concept is something that I think, is this from your weather days?
Very much so, yes.
Okay. So,
Yes.
weather. Uh, my twist is, and later on in the summer, I like to look at patterns
Yes.
of what the draft is doing right now. And I shared with Dennis the FFPC already has their best ball slim ADP information already starting out there. So I'm probably going to get around the next couple of weeks to doing the pattern. Uh, just, we need to kind of start looking at the overall pattern of the draft. And for instance, when is the first quarterback taken? When's the
Yes.
first tight end taken? When are the top 12 RBs off the board, the top 12 WRs? Those are kind of landmarks that I like to know about. I don't like to be looking at running backs to realize, uh-oh, I just waited too late for a quarterback.
Yes. Yes.
So if you have the 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 view of the global pattern, right? It's the top-down landscape view of your draft. You know when and where. You know when, what's too late for you. So I have some ideas about my first redraft and best ball quarterbacks and kind of when and where I need to pick. I haven't even picked on the who yet. I'm just thinking about traditionally when
Yes.
is there uh, danger of a low floor all of a sudden because things start changing and it's good to know when and where that thing exists and that concept. So I don't go in not understanding what has been the pattern of an average draft. I understand average draft may not be what you endure, but when I'm doing 40 or 50 redrafts, or 20 or 30 best ball, most likely the average is going to be what a lot of the drafts I'm going to deal with. It's going to be pretty close.
Yes.
So I'm not going to be surprised. I if you're in a league and all of a sudden somebody says, wow, that sure is early for a quarterback, maybe that's not early. Maybe that is about where it's been happening. That tells me they hadn't, they're going to get surprised later. And that's good. That means, you're not the biggest sucker at the table if somebody's squawking that way. That means Dennis, in graduate school, uh, it was always best to have the two rule. You always wanted two suckers below you in the grading because in for graduate students, if you got a C, that's an F. So graduate students, A, B, or F basically, and you can't in graduate school you can't have more than one course with a C, or you will get potentially thrown out.
Wow.
So y'all, yeah. And you're saying, wow, that sounds like medical school. No, folks, believe it or not, they're not that rigid in medical school. And you might ask, what? Life and death? And they're letting, yeah, there are doctors that can get C's and D's, dentists. And if they can pass the board after their 10th try, they're a doctor. And you're thinking, rut row. So yeah, it's but then you would say, well, if we had the high standard, we wouldn't have a lot of doctors, and they'd really the then we're getting into politics here. So could our economy survive if we were rigid in medical school or dental school or vet school? Wow, you wonder. So yeah, that says something about things, doesn't it? That we're willing as a society to let the last gasp doctor over the finish line. We'll take him or take her or them, I guess. Got to watch those pronouns and stumble over to see what's what, and that worries me.
Yeah,
Dennis.
the old joke over, what do you call the 500th place person in medical school
The doctor, yeah,
in a school of 500 or a
yeah,
class of
doctor,
500? You call them doctor. Yeah, it's
yeah.
scary.
It's people don't think about that. They're saying, "Hold it now." Yes, so
But I
in
do love,
graduate school, Dennis,
yeah.
two C's, you're out.
Oof.
So it's always good to have two suckers below you. So in a draft, I love to have six below me,
Oh
right? I
yeah.
like to be so
Yeah.
I can make the playoffs, but that helps in the chat room when somebody starts yucking about people's picks. I'm like, is that a legitimate issue? For instance, if the first quarterback going off is at the beginning of the third round and the first quarterback goes off in the first round, yeah, you might got some issues here, maybe. You know,
Yeah.
you know, but if the late second, not so much. So you just need to know the patterns, Dennis, and that's what I would throw on top of your decision tree. Is I go in knowing that.
Yeah, and in redraft, I go in with a specific strategy at each position. Like I treat tight ends and quarterbacks different.
Mhm.
Okay. I only really need one of each
Right.
in a typical redraft. Now I am getting to the point where I've seen enough data to suggest that grabbing two quarterbacks is better than just going at one and then taking whatever's left over on waivers if I need them. So I'm protecting myself with two quarterbacks, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an absolute must. But I treat quarterbacks and tight ends different. I will rarely take two tight ends on a typical redraft team. But the way I attack those positions with my better than zero are very different than how I attack running back and wide receiver. This year, for instance,
Mhm.
when the third quarterback goes off the board, or I get to the sixth round, let's say that nobody's taking quarterbacks, and we get to the sixth round, and there's only one or two taken. I'm gonna start looking at quarterback starting in the sixth round. And why sixth round? Because by then I've got either an elite tight end and five other position players or four other position players. So I've got my starters for the most part. I'm pretty solid. And now I can start looking at quarterback. It doesn't mean I'm going to draft one, but I can start looking. But once three are off the board, then I'm definitely looking. I'm like, what's out there? Because I don't necessarily want to get stuck too far down the totem pole. In my 2 quarterback drafting mentality now, the earlier I pick the first quarterback, the less likely I am to pick another quarterback until much later in the draft. The later I pick that first quarterback, the much sooner I'm probably coming back to get a second one. So my strategy is pretty simple. Running back and wide receiver, best player available. Try to accumulate as much talent. I want to get one of each by 4th round if possible, but it's not set in stone. I'll probably have some teams where I go heavy wide receiver, heavy running back. I'm not sure about tight end yet. I'm not sure how deep the pool is at the upside versus ADP. Haven't decided yet there, and I'm very up in the air on what I'm going to do at the tight end position until I see more ADP data for this season. In the past, I was eyeing, can I get Trey McBride? That was my game plan last year.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted McBride. I'd settle for Kittle. I was forcing it if I took Kelsey, but I would do that. This year, the guy that I think might end up being the sweet spot between talent and situation, scoring consistency, and ADP might be TJ Hawkinson. But the ADP data is just not, I'm not sure I buy it yet.
They are taking Bowers in first round this year.
Bowers going first round doesn't surprise me.
In a tight end premium environment.
Tight end premium environment. McBride's the guy that I'm eyeing to take, and I would take him as early as the early part of the 2nd round. First half of the 2nd round, I would take McBride. That's how confident I am with him. Bowers should get better this season, but they did add a running back and they changed coaches. Does he get used the same way he got used last year? Those are the kinds of decisions that you have to get into, and that makes him too risky for late first for me. I'll probably pass on him at late first.
Gotcha.
Early second, now I start having to look. But I may pass on the 2 top tight ends because there seems to be tight end inflation in ADP this year. I might pass because I might take a chance on Hawkinson. I might take a chance on people not believing in Kelsey because Kelsey's upside is still tight end 1. He's got tight end 1 upside, and you might get him pretty cheap.
I think he was in the 50s or so. He was way deep.
Yeah, so I might take a shot at that because I'll have gotten a comparable player. Because if you look at it, you're not looking at, oh, I got Kelsey and you got Bowers, or I got Kelsey and you got McBride. What you're looking at is I got Kelsey plus this running back. You got McBride and this lower quality running back. You have to look at the total of the two of what you're getting. And the idea for me, very simple. That's why after 3 quarterbacks are off the board, I am really starting to look at quarterback. Doesn't mean I have to take one, but I'm really looking once 3 are off the board because I think there's like 5 or 6 good ones this year. I would like to leave with one of the premium guys. You're not going to leave a draft with the best quarterback and best tight end and still have the best wide receiver and the best running back. You're not going to get all 4 unless you really get, you really got some great knowledge. It's harder if you're going to take a top tight end and a top quarterback. It's harder to get at RB1 and WR1 because of where you're going to be drafting those guys. So, but it doesn't mean it's impossible, but it does change the way your team is going to look.
I agree. And something that I'm doing this year is looking at what has gone on in the past for ADPs and for fantasy points per game. I stopped. I was doing my analysis of the Bush figure, and I'd finished tight ends and quarterbacks. And Dennis brought up, you know, it'd be nice if we knew this relative to what's, past with ADPs and fantasy points. So I realized that we needed to establish that. And I don't think that's out anywhere, Dennis.
No, I haven't seen
Yeah, well, we got it. It's here. I'm done.
it.
And I'm gonna do a little bit. We can do some more stuff tomorrow, next show. Uh, so I'm this is, let's see, I'm on slide 266. Should I just debate, should I get in a hurry? Yeah, I'm at 327 now. So, uh, should I show folks this or hoard it? Okay. So, I looked at 2019 to 2024 preseason ADP versus end of the season finish fantasy points per game. So, what did we think before the season? What happened after the season? And I've got a bigger database, and this information is deeper. But I just wanted to look at this point. Uh, I kind of had it already out. So uh, I've got the data. I wanted to look at it by position. So I looked at it. I gathered the top 36 ADP uh, for each position. And then I cut them into three parts. So 36 divided by 12, that's three sectors. And I compared those guys to the end of the season finisher, the top 36. I mean, if it was perfect, then it would be exactly the same, Dennis. This
Mhm.
list, and folks, we've never had a perfect year, not even close. It won't be, no. But I'm just so we know what's perfect. But now we can start getting the feel for what's, close. What is our expectations? That's the whole point of a reference class forecast is expectations. What should we expect? And so now you're getting back to patterns and what are we expecting this year in the top 36 for our positions? This information is something you need to see. What's gone on in the past so you can start planning what you're going to do this year. And that probably makes a lot of sense to a lot of people. But then my argument is, well, why am I having to do this work that should have already been out there? See, that's what angers me is it's like I spent too much time doing stuff that should already be out there for our little game. It should be. ESPN should have done this years ago. And, some of the other ones. And maybe they have behind paywalls. I don't know. Anyway, so I then color coded each year. Green were the top 12, orange were the next 12, yellow was the next. And if there are no colors, you were out of the top 36. So we had four outcomes green, orange, yellow, or W out. And so I then compared and reported by percentages, graphing, whatever. And I'll just show you an example. This is quarterbacks. Dennis was talking about quarterbacks. This is 2019, Dennis. This is the preseason over here on this side of the purple line. This is what happened uh, post after the season, end of the season finish and fantasy points. And down at the bottom are ones that were missed. So, for instance, this meant that Jeff Driscoll and Ryan Tannehill were out of the top 36 in ADP, yet they finished 9th and 11th. So, two major. So you talk about late quarterbacks. If you would have had these, and again, I didn't look at games played, Dennis, because I just didn't want to do that. So I just said, if being injury agnostic. And then Gardner Minshew was missed at 21, and there were four missed at 25. 26, Darnold, Locke, and Mason Rudolph. So you can see what that is. So 24 points per game down to 14. So it's like, I'm glad I missed Rudolph if I'm that. Yeah. So we can argue, do you even want a quarterback, past the top 24? Probably not. But anyway, you just need to see that. So I've got that for every year, Dennis. And some years we were better than other years.
Oh yeah.
Some years we were not so good and whatnot. So I have that data, and we looked at it, and the combination data were here. This is the actual numbers and percentages. So for quarterback, and that should be preseason ADP in the top three sectors here. The greens, top 12 ADP, next 12, next 12, and the actual finished in the top 12, next 12, next, or out. And if you convert to percentages, it's pretty clear that, this is over the 5 years, or maybe 6 years, I guess. 50%, Dennis, of your 25 to 36 quarterback by ADP were out. So it was flipping a coin at that point. If you wait that long, 4% were in the top 12. So basically, you
Wow.
have no chance. So this idea of a late quarterback, it really doesn't exist in ADP after the top 24. And even at the top 24, Dennis, 22% chance, 1 out of 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just realize when you see words bandied about on Twitter, I'm a late quarterback kind of guy. Well, I hope your diary shows that you are better than what 80% of the folks. If we had 100 people drafting, only 22 would have grabbed, on average, one of the top 12 in the 13th to 24th range. And I suspect if you cut into sixes, right? If you cut into subsectors, it's probably even worse. About 18th to 25th is probably worse than 22, but that's an
Yeah.
overall
Yep.
average.
Yep.
So right away, your diary is your friend. Are you that good or not? That when I'm going into the draft with my diary, I can look and see. I tend to draft multiple quarterbacks, and in the leagues that I won last year, I had I think I won 7 and made money. Or was it 8 or 9? I forgot how many I won. I got money, and I'd have to look. And I had Mayfield on 3 or 4 of them. So what happened was I drafted Dak, lost him, and fortunately I drafted people like Bo Nix and Mayfield on a bunch, 3 or 4 of those, and I survived that loss. So and in previous years, I do come up with, Jordan Love. I think the year before I had, not last year. He didn't do what I needed last year. I lost some because I waited too late and drafted him. But so my diary says I can find that late person. So, but that doesn't mean I'm a late person at all. It just means I know that my second, and sometimes with our bench of 20, depending on Dennis, the quarterback I do grab first, it will tell me if I grab a third one. Sometimes I don't. If I decide I'm drafting a Josh Allen type, I'm probably just taking one more as a backup, for the bye week thing. But if I slip down and get, a deeper one, I may take quarterbacks close to back, deeper in the draft, and maybe even take a third one later still, maybe a rookie or a rushing quarterback or something.
And here's why that is actually even better in FPPC, because in FPPC, once you if you drop a guy late in the season,
Yeah, you can't get him
he,
back. Yeah.
he's dead.
Yeah.
So if you do draft 3 quarterbacks, and let's say you hit on all 3 of them, but all of a sudden you need a replacement at another position,
Yeah.
if you drop one of your 3 quarterbacks, the one you think is least likely to be strong down the stretch, nobody else can pick him up. So by doing this strategy, you're actually preventing another team from having a good quarterback all season by taking 3 of them, but then they can't beat you down the stretch, even if you get rid of one of them. That's a great strategy. And my strategy has been a lot of times, if I get somebody who's like 7th or 8th
Mhm.
quarterback, I'm taking another one immediately. So I'm actually getting 2 quarterbacks in the top 12,
Right.
playing the matchups. But even if I'm wrong on the matchups, this tells me by taking 2, I've increased my odds of finishing in the top 12.
Right.
This is, I would have guessed it's higher than 58%, because we're usually pretty darn good at quarterback.
Now this is ADP.
ADP, what I'm saying is, taking the top 12 quarterbacks in ADP, I would have thought that this would be closer to 65 to 70%. So my perception of how good we are versus the reality of how good we are is a lot different.
Yeah.
We are
So traditionally over these 6 years, the top 12 have come back 60% of the time in the top 12, 58%.
That's not very good.
I, yeah, but you need to understand what is the average. So
Correct.
the reason I did this basically is I want something to hang our metrics on. Does your MVP, does your top 12 forecasted MVP,
Ooh, yeah.
does it hit 60% or better at the end of the season? Now
That's
we've
a
got
yeah.
something to hang on, and I'm going to compare my Bush figures to that and that kind of thing. So I've actually got that metric for the bush. I just hadn't laid it on here yet. I'm deliberately not looking yet because I stopped what I was doing because you made that comment. And that irritated me because it's like, damn it, I don't have this. But now we have. So look at this top 12, 3% are out of the top 36.
Wow.
13% are out of the top 24. So the good news, if you draft ADP wise, 86% are in the top 24. So if you're a good streamer, you got a shot at still making it at least work. You're not totally dead. But if you wait and you're drafting 13th or worse, Dennis, you've got a 50% shot of getting in the top 24 versus an 80. So you're under it. So I mean this you better have a good reason to be out of the top 12 in ADP uh,
And see that
each year.
that fits my strategy so well, where I say after three quarterbacks are off the board,
Mhm.
I'm really paying closer attention, because if you think of the way a draft could go,
Uh-huh.
most likely when that third quarterback comes off the board,
Mhm.
I will have one more round before the 12 can possibly be off the board.
Yeah.
So that's very
And
interesting. And
so
then
here is the fantasy points per game, same metric instead of ADP, but fantasy
ooh,
points last year versus this year
very interesting.
finish. So in the top 12 fantasy points last year, 76% of the time were in the top 24 versus ADP 87%. So ADP is the default for quarterbacks versus last year's fantasy points. So if you rely on last year's fantasy points uh, only, then you're not doing as good as ADP. And I had
Interesting.
that question. I had that question, and I just wanted to know what was so ADP. And if you look at the next sector, the orange to green, 13%, 22%. Yellow to green, 7%. It's almost double ADP. So the fantasy points per game, if you do want to wait super late, maybe in Superflex, Dennis, you got a double shot, 4 versus 7% to ignore ADP and go fantasy. In other words, fantasy points per game gives you a double your chance at grabbing a
Hmm.
top 12. Not, I mean, 7% still not much, but 29%. Uh, you see what happens with the yellow with the
Right.
ADP is 29%, and overall here is 19. So you lose, but the fantasy points doubles in the shot for the green. So I would definitely, if I was a superplex player, I would just scribble down what you're looking for is maybe somebody that has been ignored, maybe only had 2 or 3 games last year that had a good fantasy points that people were ignoring this year. Just if he gets another shot, maybe they were injury replacement, maybe a rookie last year and had 2 or 3 games. Just, I would just be curious. I would just put that down. That's a takeaway. That's a subtle takeaway, but there may be something there that could surprise you. Maybe a Vegas long shot. I don't know. That's what the data says. You might consider, but I would think for sure in Superflex. So there's that day. Now, Dennis, Here is the cut sectors. And what I did was I took 1 to 6, years 19 to 24, and here's the actual numbers. And notice nobody was out. So, and only 3 made it to the yellow. So, in top 6 quarterbacks, uh, a lot of them ended up in the top 12. And so, if you graph that, Dennis, it's easier probably to see. So, I looked at the end of the season, top 24. Top 12 is green, next 12 is orange. And here is the median at 3 out of 6, right? It's top 6. That's the sector. So half of it is 3. So who was above 1 to 6? If I stacked the green, but if you just look at the green, I mean, this year was perfect. The order wasn't perfect, but that's 2020 was perfect. 5 out of 6, 21 was, but mainly 4. Last year, Dennis, was 3. It's the worst in the
Wow.
last 6, it's 3. So half of those top 6 quarterbacks finished in the back half of the next 12. So you could have, with injuries and whatnot, you got a big surprise last year. And here's 7th to 12th, and then 13th through 18th, and then 19th to 24th. He's getting lean, Dennis, trying to
Oh
pick
boy.
any. Yeah. So if I'm waiting, I'm definitely probably not waiting. If you're in here 13th to 18th, it's getting tough to get a green. 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 9 out of 30, something like that. Yeah, 9 out of 30. So a third. So
Wow.
you better be damn good if you're fishing in this pond. On average, Dennis, it's, on average, look at your diary, look at your track record. I would say if you can get that third, if you're able to pull out that third, then you probably kill them in Superflex. You could grab one of these folks and you grab here. And of course, this is not Superflex distribution of
Right.
ADP. This is one quarterback. So it's probably skewed even more, but just for one quarterback here. So
So the
this gives you the pattern. So I'm going to stop here and let Dennis chew on this a little bit.
yeah, fascinating data because this kind of tells you what you're looking at as far as, you know, how to expect things to go. And boy, I'm really at a point where I don't want to be out of the top 6 in quarterbacks. I
Dennis,
so
you have arrived where I've been because I kind of had seen this data differently.
and
Yeah, that's
and
it.
so
You
and
and the pattern, Dennis, has been 6, and that tended to be in the 5th and mainly in the 6th
yeah,
rounds.
and the way people draft and looking at the number of quarterbacks taken by round, this probably means that my strategy of of really sort of forcing a
Yeah.
quarterback pick after 3 are off the board is probably a really good idea
Oh, by the
because
way, we're up next.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, moving
that's a
along.
situation. Yeah, we're moving along, and we've
Judkins
got
is still there. Golden.
Judkins, Agbuka, and Golden. So all of our first tier running backs are gone.
Yeah, except for
So
Judkins.
yeah, so that's very interesting. And it
Anyway,
appears that both of our tight ends are off the board too.
yep.
So they went early tight end,
Yeah, they
which is
did.
very interesting.
Yeah.
So we have
Anyway,
one pick to go,
well,
and we
what I
have
was going to
three
do
players
then,
left.
yeah, what I was going to do, get out of the draft room, I was going to look at the ADP. Uh, let's see if I can pull up the ADP where the sixth round is. Let's see, where do I find that? Let's see, play somewhere, and I don't know. I I sometimes I get lost on where because I pulled up the ADP. It's around here somewhere, but I was going to see who are our top six, and uh, let's see if I hit that button. Yeah, let's see, find our ADP. Damn it, makes me angry, Dennis, that I can't figure out. Let's see, FFPC ADP. League and tournament, FFPC average draft position, FFPC. Let's see. Fantasy. I know it's somewhere because I think they're trying to sell me. It's here somewhere. Come on, fools. Well, I'll have to figure it out again for us because I sent you a screenshot, didn't I?
Yeah, I
Of,
think you did.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I
Let's
don't,
see.
yeah, damn it. Uh, I know I did. And let's see. I don't know if they're hooking up. Um, they're not. Damn them. Anyway, I know somewhere that. Oh, okay. Somehow I found it, and I makes me so angry. Slim. Yeah. So, who are the quarterbacks? Uh, let's see the top six. Let's see. Let me find. First one is Allen at 25, then Jackson, second at 28, then Daniels 31, Hurts 36. So that's three rounds in. Burrow 38. It's fourth, or is it fifth? I mean, is that fifth? Is Burrow our fifth? Let's see. I don't like I can't separate this out. I'd have to copy and separate out by position so I could get my patterns that way. I don't know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're talking the sixth one. Boy, there's a gap. Mahomes at 59. So
Wow.
basically the fifth round, end of the fifth round. But there is a drop from Burrow at 38 to Mahomes at 20 picks later.
Wow.
So they're almost telling you, and then let me look the draft from Mahomes. Wow, all the way down to Baker Mayfield at 70th. So it looks like it's like they're forcing your hand to the 38th pick. So that's the kind of information. The fifth quarterback. So if you're happy with Mahomes, you can wait to the sixth round. You could get you a tight end, get you some RBs and WRs, and take Mahomes or maybe Mayfield. And that's about the last ship leaving there, Dennis, this year. I
Yeah, and
think we had more choices last year.
yeah, yeah. Well, Jaden Daniels was
Yeah.
a later
So I
pick.
need to look at a later pick in my numbers and your MVP to see who's later. So, folks, this is real early starting to make these decisions, but I wouldn't do a draft if I hadn't already thought about this and knew the pattern. You know what I'm saying, Dennis? I'd already have this information here for us. Let me go back to my data. So anyway, that is your conclusion, top six. That's what we're left with this year.
Yeah, and way I would attack this too, and I quite often have done, is I look at my forecast of, perfect draft. If I could get the top ranked guy at each position, how does that draft look?
Mhm.
My top rated quarterback using the MVP
Mhm.
is Joe Burrow. So at this point, I can get Burrow as the fifth quarterback off the board, and he can be my number one guy. Now, if I look at tight ends, I got to take Bowers, and I'm not sure I want to do that.
Well, I've
And
got the ADP for tight ends, Dennis. You see,
yeah,
we will have that information. You and I don't know if I want to share it yet. And you're saying, "Oh, please, Dr. Bush, shares it." You're asking me to have already chopped the wood to share it with you, and you'll chop the wood down the road. I know. I almost, just tell us what's on the test, Dr. Bush.
so
Just, is this
so
going
in
to
the
be on the test?
so in the way too early best ball that I'm doing in FPPC,
Mm-hmm.
Bowers was the sixth pick off the board
And
in the
that
first
is
round.
right where he's being picked.
McBride was number 10.
That's a little early.
So what that's telling me is I'm okay to go to my third
Mhm.
tight end because that's way too early for me.
Yeah, but I've got this same data for all the positions. I don't
Very
think we'll do.
interesting.
Yeah, so let me finish up here. So I went back and let's see, this is sector information. So I quantified numbers by percentages down here so you can actually start looking at things. So the good news on the quarterbacks, 7th to 12th, is I consider in the 25th or worse, the end of the season, that's an out for me. So we're talking 17. So one out of five is going to be a real landmine.
Wow.
Yeah, 8% is a landmine in the top six, double that in the 7th to 12th. But notice, look at the percentage really drops almost, not half, but a lot. 72 to 44, Dennis.
Woo.
So that is what you're by waiting to the seventh quarter on. Again, this is average. Again, this is Mahomes and Mayfield this year, right there on that border, and it gets worse still. In other words, the further down. So now you know what you got, folks. I'm not saying that you should, not draft later. My argument is you need to look at your diary. How good are you compared to just blindly taking ADP? You need to know this information. This is part of your decision making. And I don't know why these other places that we pay money for, damn it, don't have this for me. And I had to go get this. And that just cranks my gears. So then finally, the last figure is I show the green, the orange, the yellow, and the white is instead of white is red. So just scary. But look at the 70 to 4. Man, that is a hell of a gap here, Dennis. Look at that. That's so notice it's all basically 50-50 shot at grabbing uh, you know, a 13th to 25th guy, you know. versus, you know, a top 12, 50-50 if you wait this late. So that's
And
what you're versus look, 70-20%. Big difference in the orange.
huge difference. And it really plays into the strategy that I've played in the past that I
I,
think will apply.
yep.
The later you take that first quarterback, the sooner you're thinking take the
Doubling
second
up
one.
for a streamer.
Give me two shots at
I
that.
believe you and I both have been doing that.
We've been doing that regularly where I've been sixth, seventh, or seventh and eighth, taking back to back quarterbacks. And it worked quite well. Or last year, it was taking a quarterback in the sixth and eighth rounds.
Yeah.
And, it ended up being either a Jordan Love, Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff. Those were the three that I had two of the three quite often. And we see that not only is your percentage better, but I would suggest that your chances of being right on the matchup play has probably also increased as well. So you're you're able to offset a little bit of that 72%. And here's the key.
Mm-hmm.
You're not making up that 72%. That's a huge advantage. But you've added a running back, a wide receiver, or a tight end that is better than that 72% team in most cases. So you're hurting yourself, but you're hurting yourself in a strategic way because you're saying, okay, I understand this is my limitation, but here's where I'm going to make up for it.
Okay, last thing, what I'm going to do then is we will circle back to Bush figure, the com, and the MVP, and uh, we will be able to know what's what. And our combined metrics, Dennis,
Ooh.
we will start building a database to test and drop it on top of this. So we will be able to judge what's what in the future. And of course, I'll keep up with this now that I've got this data. But anyway, I shouldn't have to do this. Makes me angry. So that's quarterback. Maybe we'll do another one next week. But on my secret stuff, I just hadn't done videos this year. I guess being retired and I'm like, I'm getting old and crotchety, Dennis. You kids go sharpen your own damn axe and figure out where the trees are. I'm tired of telling you where it's at. So anyway, anyway, that's what I'm gonna say this week. Uh, don't know if anything else you want to bring up. Folks, you need to look at our pre-show video because I think we had some good stuff we talked about. Maybe even after the show, we might talk a little secret stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
always can count on that. And are we going to talk some
What?
derby before or
Oh,
during the after show?
Ennis. Well, what should we do?
Let's include it in the regular show here. Show
Okay,
off how
so
good we
then
are at
I
finding
need to
long
pull
shots.
up my data here for the Churchill. Let's see here, Churchill. You got your form here. What race is Pat Day Miles coming up here, Dennis? Kentucky Derby is race
Race
12.
12. Yep.
Okay, so uh, as I looked at this earlier, So are we going to, how do you want to give long shots? You want to give who?
Let's go through your data first, and
Okay.
then I will tell you who I am going to probably pick, and it's not going to be a favorite.
Okay.
He's going to have a little bit of odds to him.
Okay. So I think Dennis has rightly said when you look at the running style of many of these contenders, they we have about five out of how many's in the field now?
It'll be 20 in this field.
Is it 20 now?
Yep, because Baeza, the 21 horse, has uh, scratched in.
Oh, has he?
The 10 horse Grande, who is going to be a long shot,
Is
is
out.
out.
So we got five of these horses that are absolute gotta win on the lead.
Yes.
Citizen Bull, Nequios or Nequos, Neo Equus, whatever it is, Owen, Almighty, American Promise, and East Avenue are all E horses. They are gotta have the lead. So not only one's gonna get. There may be a bunch of them. So it looks, and that's one, two. So we got some early inside horses. We got number 20 and 12 and 5. So we got a lot of early inside speed, Dennis. It's going to be crazy. So if you're looking for the winner, it usually means you've got to go past the speed horses. And the obvious one, believe it or not, is the the favorite. Journalism has a late pace of 109 in this metrics that I use. Uh, he looks like the smart play if speed just tears it up, and he should be coming late. Hard to leave him out of my trifectas and superfectas, Dennis.
Yep.
So I do like him. I do like then uh, Flying Mohawk is another one. So if I were to play a superfecta, I like the 11 and the 8. Journalism, the favorite. Cue him up with Mohawk in my superfectas. That's what, and then if you want a secret super pick, I do like Final Gambit as well,
Yep.
number 3. So I
Yep.
like if we throw journalism out, then I would pick the 11 and the 3 to put in my exotics this year, Dennis. 11 and 3.
Yeah. This is a tough race to handicap. And anytime you have a 20 horse field,
Yeah.
you're going to have a tough handicap. And journalism is a very smart favorite here, and you might get a decent price
He's
with a
7
20
to
horse.
2 right now.
Yeah,
It's
not
nice.
that's not bad. Great jockey. This kid Umberto Rispoli
Yeah.
from Italy is one of the just of the newer younger jockeys.
Yeah.
He is on a roll. You get Michael McCarthy, who really knows how to get a horse ready for a big race
Mhm.
and also knows how to help the jockeys strategize here, because the Derby ends up being a strategy race. And I want a great jockey because of that. So here's the problem. Not only is there so much speed in the race, but we had about 4/10 of an inch of rain on that track yesterday, and maybe even more in some parts of the track. It was a downpour. But it was a really weird shower where it didn't last long across the whole track. But it definitely, the track took a lot of water. So you're going to have a drying track today. it probably will be good or might even be fast by the time, if they don't get any more rain today. It drains pretty well at that track, but it'll be a drying track, which is usually bad for speed horses. Like it just is a heavier racetrack for them. And none of the speed horses, you mentioned it perfectly, none of them have that tactical speed that they've shown as far as that goes.
No.
So you don't have a situation where you have a good, oh, this horse is a speed horse, but he'll probably go tactical here. None of them show that tendency at all. Um, so of the speed horses, the one that I think, again, you have to read past the form on here. Okay. The horse that I think could get a tactical speed positioning, in other words, I don't think he's fast enough to outdo the rest of them, is the 4-horse Rodriguez. I could see him being tactical speed here, especially with Mike Smith and Bob Baffert, combination there. And he had a really good time in the Wood Memorial. So I'm looking at that going, could this horse be sort of that, okay, he's going to change his way of doing things. And he was slightly off the pace in earlier races leading up to the Wood. Mm-hmm. In the Wood, he just rolled him, start to finish. But the horse that I'm looking at, first thing I look at when I see an off track, does anybody have a history on an off track? And there really isn't anybody of the main contenders who has. Luxor Cafe, the 7-horse, has 3 races, 3 wins off track over in Japan. That's about it. Otherwise, Neoquist, the 2-horse, won a 6 furlong on an off track. Very little off track history with any of these horses. But the horse that I'm kind of looking at as being the upsetter is another closer who was taken off of this horse has a really interesting development. One of my favorite trainers, Steve Asmussen, tried him and had success on the turf there just to start, had some good races to start on the turf last year. Moved him to dirt, didn't do well on the Oaklawn Park circuit, so he moved him over to Louisiana for the Louisiana Derby, which is a 16th of a mile longer than the other preps. Does that help? But he seemed to like the extra distance, and he really closed well. Joel Rosario, good jock. So I'm looking at the 14 Tistastic as being a shot at, I think he'll have a shot at hitting the board late if he can get a trip and find his way through the traffic, because he is going to be closing. But I agree with your picks too. This is a good maybe exotic race to try a little box for an exacta in here, because I think you're going to get good prices with a 20-horse field.
Yep.
And it'd be hard to leave journalism out. He's done everything you've asked of a horse to do. The only race that he ever lost was his first race, and came back and has been undefeated since. That horse has proven that he's the best in this field, but he's raced out west. And I'm not so sure that the West Coast was a deep talent pool leading up here. But boy, very interesting race. But I'm going to take a shot at a long shot here with Tistastic. Publisher, the 13, the other Asmussen horse, closed well in the Arkansas Derby as well. If he gets a little better trip, he could be hitting the board. This is going to be a race where out of the 20, I can say that there are only about 5 of them that I didn't think had a shot in here.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Uh, I like I said, the 11 and the 3, I believe, are the ones that I would be looking at for, some superfecta magic here. Flying Mohawk, huh, Dennis? You know, he 34% trainer, blinkers off, chance to improve. You know, never raced at Churchill, never hit an off track. Loves the turf. Uh, so loves that late kick. Never been on dirt. Uh, Turfways, fairgrounds, all weather and turf, and has been bobbled and bumped every time in his last couple of races here. And he broke his maiden at Churchill on the turf. So I'm just saying, later in the season, you might be hearing from him on turf races for 3-year-olds. Anyway,
and
that's
I
that,
and I
that's
have
who I'd
another
like.
I
Yeah,
have another real long shot to throw in there.
yeah,
Threw a dog of a race in at the Arkansas Derby, but won the Rebel at a nice price. Cole Battle, the 16. He's going to be close, and he's got some history off track. Like I
yeah.
said, this is a race that is so wide open. It's going to be very interesting to watch how this one develops. But I agree with you. I don't think it's going to be a speed horse. I think you're going to have to come off the pace here to win the Kentucky Derby today.
I agree, and that was good. Good picks. We'll see what happens. I don't know, Dennis. You never know who's going to get what, but the speed, I think it's going to cook them. And I
And
think
I
some of these these closers are going to surprise people.
and look during watch the post when they come out for the post parade and they're introducing the horses.
Mm-hmm.
Watch very carefully because the horse that winks at
Yeah,
you,
yeah.
it
Shakes his
that's
head up and down.
that's the one that the hot dog man
The hot
is
dog man.
telling you to play. So head on over to the scienceoffantasyfootball.com. Check out my article and check out all the data that the professor will be sharing with you over there. This ADP data, understanding the past when it comes to data, is so key at being able to conquer the future. I'll probably have some more philosophy of the draft articles coming out to kind of take you through my process. And my process will be changing a little bit after seeing the professor's ADP data, because that does go into how I will be managing my drafts this year. And again, folks, got to have a strategy, and got to have a strategy that is an adaptive style to do well in redraft. And head on back here next week for another edition of the Science of Fantasy Football.
Get to work, folks.
All right.
Yeah, that was good. That was
That is
good.
good.
Do we have any secret stuff? I don't know if I want to say anything or not. I'm still.
Yeah.
Is there
I,
something?
well, I am very curious to see when we look at the MVP and the Bush data,
Yeah. Where they
if it,
where they
it
hang on this? Yeah.
how does it compare to beating consensus, beating ADP?
That's why we will now have those metrics for us to compare. And
Yes.
I've already done, like I said, so we did quarterbacks, and I hadn't even looked at Bush thing for the quarterbacks. I've got the data. I just decided not to look at it yet. But like I said, by the time we're drafting in August. All this should be clear here, but
Yeah, and what I'm working on now is I'm looking at smaller sample sizes of my MVP and to see if a 6, 8, 10 game sample from the year before
uh-huh.
shows any ability at all
Mhm.
to forecast who might be that sort of big improving player
Mhm.
for the following season. I'm not so sure that it will. I think the smaller you go, the more likely you are to have just everybody be able to hit that. But I'm interested to see what the 6, 8, and 10 game samples do. I intentionally did not start working on that until after I had my May forecasts of MVP done
Oh,
because
okay.
I didn't want my latest research to change the way I was looking at stuff.
So you sent me your 2024 to 2020. Okay. On the targets, the MVP, and all that. That spreadsheet you sent me. Do you remember that?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. The way you've got it here is I can easily run this through principal component
Ooh.
analysis. And we can look at some of these things and how that uh, we can look at total MVP, and I can make that the variable we're trying to predict. And I could look at all this other stuff, and we can look at this, Dennis. You've got enough data here that I can hang that, and we'll look at that.
Yeah,
So how about that?
that was a really interesting exercise to look at
I don't know when
the
I'll have time to do,
distribution.
but that's coming.
Yeah, the reason I built that the way I did
Yeah.
is because I can do an easy sort and sort of double check. Like I can look at, okay, what if this defense is one of the top 5 this year?
So defensive
What
points,
happens?
is that the average defensive point?
Average rounded up to the nearest point. So that's, for instance, Denver gave up 18 points a game last year. And there were 3 teams that gave up 18 or fractional,
Yeah, Chargers.
Chargers and Philadelphia. Those were the 3 best defenses. What's interesting is if you look at the top 5 defenses every year in, the stingiest, the only quarterbacks that show up as being over 100 in MVP,
Mm-hmm.
the guys who run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You don't have a non-running quarterback over 100 on the stingiest 5 defenses.
Nice.
Now the problem is the stingiest 5 defenses seem to change a lot from one year to the next. So the only non-running quarterback that has hit that has been Burrow. That's it. Out of 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
that's it. Burrow is the exception to the rule. That's pretty startling when you think of it that way. Dak came close. They were 6th best, but that's 1 year for that as well. So I'm looking at the stingy defenses. I don't want a pocket quarterback on that team. So it's going to be interesting how the all data lays out. But that's what I took as the takeaway there.
Right.
looking at the relationships between receiver to receiver, it was very difficult to have two over 100. Like, that was very uncommon to have two over 100. And when it happened, you had two things that happened. You had that second, the wide receivers both missed games. So in the case of Tampa Bay, if you break down the MVPs of Godwin and Evans, they're both over 110 for the season last year. But if you look at the games where both of them played, Evans had a 70s, had a MVP and only in the 70s. His MVP soared and was exactly 140, just like Godwin, when Godwin was out. So the lead wide receiver on that team last year was capable of a 140, no matter who it was.
That's neat.
And the next wide receiver, because if you grade all the rest of the wide receivers after Godwin went out, you end up seeing that relationship as well. And what you end up seeing is that McMillan and Palmer, 70 was their upside. Like, they couldn't do better than 70. So it tells you that distribution last year was 140 to the top guy, 70 to the second guy, no matter who was number one and who was number two. That really surprised me, to see such a locked in. And I wonder if that's quarterback dependent, that's how the quarterback sees the field. But overall, for the whole season, McMillan as a rookie was only 33.3. But when Godwin went out, he was up closer to 70. Just fascinating how that dynamic between the two players ended up changing so much. But that data told me that I was probably right with my forecast for Hunter on Jacksonville. If Hunter exceeds 100, then my low side forecast for Thomas will be correct. Because right now, I've got Thomas forecasted as the lead wide receiver on that team at a 110, but I have his variance between 80 and 120. So if Hunter comes up over 100, then Thomas will be closer to that 80. And the distribution that I saw over the last 5 years across the whole landscape of the league by team by team, tells me that that's probably an accurate forecast. Because right now I got Hunter at a 60 to 105 with a 75 as his target forecast. So I got 110 for the wide receiver one. I got 75 for the wide receiver two. If you look at teams with two good wide receivers, it's not a bad forecast, because the when they're more of a difference between the two of them, it's when one of the guys goes off for like a 130 or 140, then the other guy's more likely to be 75 or 80. So I might be a little low on Hunter. Hunter might be able to produce like an 85, but it's looking at all this data, it's very interesting. I think the range of forecast, I'm going to be much more accurate than my 70% share. But we'll see. And with Hunter, I don't even know how many offensive snaps he's going to play. So that's the tough part
That's
there.
the trick on that.
And does he last? Does he survive if he plays 100 snaps a game? How many games can he last before he breaks down? Is
Yeah.
he dead by game 12? Is he hurt? I mean, and then do they have him return kicks on top of that? I don't know how much they plan on using him. And that factored into my 70% level of forecast. If they get closer to August and they're saying, okay, he's going to be, 80% on offense, 20% on as a cornerback,
Right.
then I start looking at maybe a 90 for his forecast instead of 75. I'm very conservative with that 70% level. And
Well, anyway, I'm going to take your data
yeah,
and at some point, I don't know when, but I will circle around to that and
perfect.
we'll look at that, see what's going on. I guess I'm going to stop recording here. That was good stuff, by the way, Dennis. Take us through a really interesting sliver
Yeah,
of
yeah,
discussion there. Yeah.
it's yeah, and that's why it ended up on the after show. It's not,
Yeah, yeah, but
it's kind of
it's
deep into the weeds, and it's more of for you and I to discuss than it
yeah,
is to share with the class
yeah. Well,
sometimes.
they
But
got to hear some of it here. Anyway,
yes,
let me
indeed.
shut this down.